Overall, for the port industry throughout the hemisphere, our main objective is to be able to share, collaborate, share best practices, share lessons learned. Shifting trade patterns, that's a continually evolving trade routes. India's population is going to exceed China's population by 2030, which obviously impacts in terms of trade routes, et cetera. Trade here in the United States is projected to double by 2020, especially containerized trade, and it's expected to quadruple shortly after 2030. We've been very pleased as a country to see a resurgence in U.S. exports. Certainly the energy market has been a contributor to that, and that changing demand and production of energy has significant implications as well. There are new mega alliances that have been formed and are being formed and being considered that, again, impact trade flows, impact port calls, and impact the size of vessels and the number of containers or other commodities, cargo that is going to be loaded and unloaded at each port call. The Panama Canal expansion that is underway and will due to be completed in the next year or so will triple the current capacity in terms of the number of containers that a vessel will be able to handle through the Panama Canal. Even with the expanded canal, many of the larger vessels will still not be able to fit. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and other free trade agreements that are currently being negotiated between the U.S. and our trading partners will have significant impacts on trade, both imports and exports. The bottom line is that ports throughout the world, and certainly here in the United States, need to prepare for larger vessels, and that's both in terms of our navigation channels, to make sure that those navigation channels leading into and out of our port facilities are deep and wide enough to be able to accommodate the larger vessels, but also that the marine terminals are able to have the cranes and other equipment that can handle the larger vessels. Again, that landside connection, whether it's a rail connection, a road connection, first mile, last mile, et cetera, that infrastructure needs to be able to handle greater volumes. Between a quarter and a third of our overall economy relies on international trade, both imports and exports. And the trade right now that's flowing through our nation's seaports support over 13 million jobs. Our biggest problems and bottlenecks are happening on the connections on both the water side and the land side. And the projection between now and 2040 is that there's a $46 billion funding gap between what is the current trend of funding and what's required just to accommodate the infrastructure that's needed now. The overall challenge when we talk about the population growth, the trade growth, the realities in terms of international trade and our competitiveness is that the simple truth is, unfortunately, that we were not able to be handling the needs of our nation and remain competitive internationally going forward without significant increases in our infrastructure investment. We as a nation aren't going to be able to accommodate what our consumers need, what our manufacturers need, what our farmers, exporters, et cetera, need to compete internationally. The harbor maintenance tax, which is a tax on the users of the federal navigation channels to fund the maintenance of the channels. Historically, only about half of that tax has been utilized for that purpose. We think it's absolutely vital that if you're collecting a tax, a user fee on the users of a system, that tax should be fully utilized for its intended purpose to fully maintain the navigation channels throughout our nation. Corps of Engineers that is primarily responsible for maintaining the federal navigation channels has only been able to maintain about, even of the top 59 ports, about half the channels, about half the width, about half the time. We're not even being able to keep the system where it's supposed to be, much less improve. And again, with the realities of the global market, we need to be able to determine what improvements are needed and make those improvements on a much quicker time frame. Much of the material that's collected in dredging operations is clean and can be utilized for whether it's beach renourishment or many other roles. So to be able to use that dredging in a sustainable fashion and use the material where possible as a resource. A robust studies and construction program that provides analysis, determines which navigation channels do need to be deepened and widened and to what depths, and allows those projects to move forward on on a more timely, streamlined fashion. A country like Panama recognized, they looked at the global economy, they looked at world trade, they looked at the larger vessels that were coming on stream, and they made the decision that for Panama to remain a maritime trading nation and competitive internationally, that they needed to improve their maritime-related infrastructure, and that obviously includes the canal and port facilities on both sides of the canal. Other countries throughout the world are doing the same, certainly China, India, Brazil. Throughout the world, countries are making huge investments in their port-related infrastructure to be competitive in the global economy. And for America to remain competitive and be a leader in international trade, we need to do the same. Now, kind of shifting to the land side, importantly, the designation of gateways and corridors. Where does most of our trade flow and most of our freight flow? We think it's absolutely vital that those intermodal connections are a critical piece of that freight network. We think it's absolutely vital this time around that there be dedicated funding for freight in the reauthorization. Bottom line is, again, we think we're going to need almost kind of an all hands on deck and all types of opportunities, whether it's direct federal funding formula, discretionary grants, public-private partnerships, innovative financing. Just between now and 2020, it'd be over a $3 trillion cost to our economy without making those investments, and almost a $500 billion loss in potential export revenue. With the investment in infrastructure that's necessary, we'd see about 3.5 million new jobs added to the U.S. economy. Seaports deliver prosperity. And I think that sums it up very succinctly in terms of the role that seaports and that related infrastructure on the land and water side plays in terms of our nation's economy.